I always thought the worst thing a boss could do is fire you. Gavin Pierce taught me otherwise. He didn't tear my life apart in a single dramatic move. He dismantled me in fractions, credit stolen on stages, jokes in meetings that erased my contribution, subtle undermining that made my confidence look like the problem. He was a professional at minimizing people. He called it leadership. I called it theft. I was young, hungry, and unusually meticulous. I built campaigns the way an architect draws temples, plans, contingencies, version control, the whole obsessive rigmarole. Gavin built narratives. Where I saw process, he saw a story to sell. Where I saw detail, he saw a chance to improvise and score applause. He liked to stand in the light and let people assume the rest of us were part of the wallpaper. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was at a quarterly review. I had spent 6 months on a brand overhaul that would shape the company's public voice for the next 2 years. I'd run focus groups, drafted scripts, rewritten deck after deck until the rhythm felt inevitable. I remember polishing the last slide and thinking, this is good enough to be dangerous. I trusted Gavin to present it to the board. It was a small risk, a professional courtesy. I told myself it would be a triumph for the team. He presented it like it was his epiphany. He used my metaphors, my consumer hooks, my case examples. When the CEO asked who led the creative, he said, "We had a strong team." He smiled at me like we were sharing a joke. The applause went to Gavin. The budget increase went to Gavin. The promotion whispers started next week for him. You tell yourself you'll respond with fury. You tell yourself you'll call them out at the next meeting. In practice, fury is messy and easy to discredit. If you scream, the narrative becomes you hot, emotional, unstable. You don't want that. You want to be right, and to make them wrong in a way nobody can choke down with a polished explanation. I decided to be patient. I decided to be surgical. Step 1 was documentation. People hide behind charisma, evidence doesn't. I saved drafts, timestamped notes, email chains. I traced every edit and every late-night copy-paste. I kept my own version control like a habit, naming files with dates and tiny, objective descriptors. When you're gathering proof, you don't let passion color the facts. You write facts down in a ledger and let the ledger accumulate like snow. Step 2 was to let him be himself. Gavin's arrogance was a tool. He believed the story he told about himself so entirely he stopped checking his own work. He assumed others would fill the gaps and he'd collect the glory. I became very good at letting him collect glory and then watching his carelessness bloom. I started small. I corrected mistakes he made, but let him take credit for the fixes. If a client questioned a metric he'd quoted, I quietly sent the corrected report afterward and CC'd the client and the data team. If an internal Slack thread misattributed an idea, I left a single, polite, time-stamped comment linking to my original draft. These moves looked like helpful teamwork. They also built a paper trail that, if anyone dug, would point away from me and toward a pattern. Gavin's first great mistake was assuming no one watched the scenes. He began to rely on showmanship and verbal charm in meetings while delegating the messy work, and the messy work has metadata. One afternoon, I noticed he'd uploaded a pitch deck to the shared drive with track changes enabled. I didn't open it to accuse him. I opened it to record it, downloaded a copy, filed it under my ledger, and archived the original. Evidence loves being archived. Next, I seeded doubt strategically. I started raising small questions in meetings, neutral, curious, not accusatory. Can we confirm the origin of this research? Did the analytics team sign off on that claim? My tone was always mild. People don't dislike a pragmatic question, they dislike a paranoid sleuth. Each question required a response that either confirmed his claims or revealed holes. The holes multiplied. Gavin got sloppy. He began to forward contracts without attachments, to promise deliverables without timelines, to claim vendor approvals that didn't exist. I documented each slip. I sent polite follow-ups that read like service emails. For audit purposes, could you confirm the vendor sign-off by end of day? People responded. The threads populated my ledger. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just paper and timestamps. The company's governance liked what governance likes: clarity. I also cultivated quiet allies. Revenge in an office isn't a lone crusade, it's a slow social correction. I didn't recruit conspirators, I helped people see patterns for themselves. I made sure junior staff had access to the right documentation and felt empowered to flag inconsistencies. I taught them how to ask the right questions in public forums. Not because I wanted battalions, but because truth multiplies when it's in more than one pair of eyes. When the CFO, Linda Hayes, began to ask about budget variances, the anomalies were already sitting in a neat, boring folder labeled Q2 Reconciliation. That's the thing. When you do the work of evidence, you make the inconvenient visible in the language the company uses: numbers, invoices, signed attachments. Gavin couldn't charm away a ledger that traced back months. One morning, the audit team asked to do a spot check. It was incidental, routine, the kind of corporate hygiene everyone pretends is bureaucratic until it reveals a fever. The auditors found a mismatch in vendor invoicing, a grant labeled as consulting that had no contract attached, a deck whose metadata showed edits by multiple users with different claims of ownership. The auditors followed the trail to the shared drive, and then to the email threads that linked ideas to people. Facts sat in rooms and spoke when the right person opened the door. When the auditors asked for interviews, I answered calmly. I said what the ledger said. I did not theatrically accuse. I handed them files, dates, and timestamps and let the auditors make the causal connections. Professionals love data because data doesn't have motives. It only has consequences. Gavin denied anything intentional. He had a flood of justifications, fast schedules, cross-functional teams, miscommunications. The board listened politely. The difference between a story and evidence is the boardroom's appetite for risk. When the auditors presented timelines that matched edits, emails that predated his claims, and expense allocations inconsistent with procurement rules, the board's patience thinned. The important move, the one people remember a week later, was not the audit. It was the way the company handled reputation. HR sent a neutral memo about crediting contributions and vendor documentation. The memo was bland, corporate, and perfectly calibrated to cause people to look at their own behavior without appearing accusatory. Gavin was placed on administrative leave while an internal review proceeded. No dramatic firing. No stormy confrontation. Just a quiet recalibration of the company's operating procedures. I remember standing by the coffee machine the morning his desk went quiet and a hand absent-mindedly on my shoulder, someone's empathy, the kind you get without drama. I didn't celebrate. I felt an odd hollowness, like scraping paint to reveal a wall. The real satisfaction came later, when people who had been tentative in meetings began sourcing their own talking points and giving credit where credit was due. When juniors who feared speaking up asked questions without flinching. When the creative team stopped deferring to charisma and started asking to see the work. Gavin called once, a clipped voicemail that tried to sound conciliatory. He asked for a meeting to clear the air. I never replied. There's a peculiar power in silence that the loud cannot replicate. He left a polished apology email for HR, too many qualifiers, too little responsibility. HR forwarded it to the board with a note. They accepted his resignation. He left a week later with a terse email and a finality that tasted like absence. People ask if revenge felt good. There's a different question. Did it feel necessary? Yes. Not as spectacle, but as correction. I didn't want him ruined in the street. I wanted the system, our workplace, to stop rewarding the kind of theft he practiced. I wanted new hires to see structures that protected their work from being swallowed by charisma. I wanted a ledger to matter more than a smile. In the months that followed, the company rewrote its attribution policy, implemented mandatory version control in shared documents, and required vendor contracts to attach to purchase orders. We created a small internal awards program that publicly credited originators of campaigns. No single person's revenge fixed the culture. But a system of small, boring rules did. The ledger I'd compiled became nerdy evidence for a better process. Sometimes, I catch myself watching someone at a meeting who has that same polished ease Gavin had. My first instinct is the ledger, the slow, careful recording, because I learned that documentation protects dignity. It's not glamorous. It's not viral. It's practical and precise. In the end, the most effective revenge I found wasn't a theatrical takedown. It was a quiet reweaving of the workplace so that theft couldn't be invisible anymore. A year later, at the anniversary of the brand launch, someone thanked me during the town hall. He used my name when he talked about the original idea, not as a dig or a boast, but as a fact. It arrived in a single sentence and landed like an anchor. People clapped. I accepted the small, focused satisfaction of being seen for work I had done, and for the company to recognize that visibility matters. I burned the printed copies of my ledger that night, symbols, not evidence, and I kept the digital files where they belonged, indexed, dated, secure. I learned that revenge and justice aren't always separate things. Sometimes revenge is the moment you stop letting the powerful edit the record and you make the record speak for itself.